Welcome, everyone, from Canada, the United States, Asia, and beyond to our panel discussion on the roles of Asia observers in Arctic governance. My name is Jia Wang, and I'm the Interim Director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. We're so delighted to once again join colleagues at the Institute of China-America Studies in Washington, D.C. in organizing this event. Our panel discussion will be followed by Q&A. We encourage our audience members to submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. As you know, Canada and the US are both members of the 8-country Arctic Council. The others include Nordic nations and Russia. Climate change has increased accessibility to potential shipping lanes and resources in the Arctic region. While traditionally marked by cooperation and peaceful coexistence, the Arctic is increasingly seen as an area for geopolitical competition. Growing international focus on economic, environmental, and security significance of the region also brought geographically distant countries to the table as Arctic Council observers. Today, we will hear from distinguished panelists from all 5 Asian observer countries, namely China, Japan, South Korea, India, and Singapore, on their perspectives on the roles these nations may play in the future of the Arctic and its governance. Now, it's with great pleasure I would like to first introduce our moderator today, Nong Hong. She's a dear friend and a colleague for more than a decade. Nong currently serves as the Executive Director of the Institute for China-America Studies, and also she's a Senior Fellow at the University of Alberta's China Institute. She holds a PhD from the University of Alberta. Her research focuses on international relations and comparative politics, ocean governance in East Asia and Arctic, law of the sea, international security, and international dispute settlement and conflict resolution. Nong is a prolific author. She has published multiple books and edited volumes and numerous articles. And she's also a highly sought-after speaker. Without further ado, I would like to invite Nong to introduce the panelists. Nong, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jia. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Before I introduce our panelists, let me just say a few words about the background of today's event. I think we all understand that because of the Ukraine crisis, and there's a lot of going on with regard to the Arctic Council function. In March 2020, the seven states of Arctic Council make a statement to pause the participation in any of the meetings of Arctic Council, which actually have a huge impact on international cooperation on the Arctic. And in June, a few months later, in June 2022, the 7 members called for a limited resumption of the work of the Arctic Council, but only with a precondition that the projects that do not involve the participation of the Russian Federation. And as of today, this morning, I opened the homepage of Arctic Council, and their sentence still there. The Arctic Council is pausing all official meeting of the Council and its subsidiary body until further notice. So we are very curious when may Norway take over the chairmanship of Arctic Council, whether we're going to see any change of the Arctic Council. That remains a question. And so the de facto withdrawal, maybe this is a very strong word to say. I mean, the 7 Western Arctic states members of the Council, they placed observers, particularly the Asian 5 countries, in a very difficult position because the Council was a primary window into this regional affairs for the non-Arctic governments to play a role. And very interesting, May next month of 2023 will mark the 10th anniversary of the 5 Asian 5 countries who were granted the observer status of Arctic Council. So we thought a lot of questions that we'd like to discuss. We'd like to have the input, insightful from our panelists today. For example, what does the suspension of Arctic Council meeting mean for the Arctic Council observers, and how the observers will be able to adapt to a changing Arctic function? So we're delighted, as John mentioned, we're delighted to have 5 speakers join us for a discussion. Let me briefly introduce them. Okay, firstly, we have Dr. Zhao Long from China. He's a senior fellow and the deputy director of the Institute for Global Governance Studies at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. And then we have Ms. Sakiko HATAYA. She's a research fellow at Ocean Policy Research Institute of Sasakawa Foundation, Peace Foundation from Japan. And we have Dr. Kim Wonhee. He's the senior researcher of Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology. And then we have Captain Anurag BISEN. He has been serving in the Indian Navy for almost 35 years. Now he's working on maritime studies at India's Defense Studies and Analyses. And then we have Dr. Christopher Lane. He's currently an independent scholar based in Singapore, but prior to that, he was senior research fellow at, and also head of the publication at the Energy Studies Institute at National University of Singapore. So I'm not going to read their full bio. You're going to find their full bio very detailed, a lot of very productive work in the Arctic through our event homepage. So now I would like to invite everyone to make a very brief introduction about the country they were represented. What is the Arctic policy from your country, and what any further development since 2013 when you were granted the observer status in Arctic Council. Let me begin with Dr. Zhao Long.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hong, and I'm really delighted to join today's discussion. And I would like to express my gratitude, of course, to the University of Alberta and the Institute for China-American Studies for the kind invitation. And I'm very glad to have this exchange of views with all the colleagues from the observer states of the Arctic Council. Let me just very briefly introduce the, China's Arctic policy and the experiences, practices over the past 10 years, which, as Dr. Hong mentioned, this year marks the 10th anniversary of China becoming the observer of the Arctic Council. So I think over the past 10 years, China as the active participant, builder, and contributor to the Arctic affairs, we have made a lot of progress in this regard. We have released the very first one, white paper on Arctic policy in 2018, which I have personally participated in as a member of drafting this document. And also China has made multiple, I think in multiple dimensions, China have deepened and achieved a wide range of international cooperation. China has put forward an initiative called jointly building the Polar Silk Road, and etc. I think generally speaking, China's Arctic policy has achieved development from many various practices, and China is transformed from so-called newcomer to the Arctic affairs to a more matured contributor to Arctic affairs. So I think it's quite clearly being declared in our white paper that cooperation is the principle of China's participation, and improving the understanding of the Arctic, promoting environmental and ecological protection, rational use of the Arctic, and strengthening the international governance are our priorities. I think China's involvement in these years could be divided as three pillars. Where the first one is a science-driven participation. You can find that China's Yellow River Station in Svalbard is becoming the important observation platform for those cutting-edge scientific researches. And China has completed 12 scientific expeditions in the Arctic. Currently, we are having 2 research vessels, including Xuelong and Xuelong 2, as important platform for these expeditions. Secondly, I think China's involvement could be described like sustainable use of the Arctic. And especially in the shipping area, COSCO Shipping, Chinese leading shipping company, has conducted 42 voyages on the via the Northeast Passage, and China has made I think quite important contributions to the Arctic shipping. And China has become the Russia's main foreign partner and investor in those natural resource projects, including LNG in the Arctic, such as Yamal LNG and Arctic LNG 2 projects. And also we have conducted a lot of discussions with our Nordic partners with regard jointly construction of Arctic corridor projects, trans-Arctic telecom cable projects, and etc. And last but not least, I think China's participation is more focused on the goal-based governance. China actively participated in various forms of the governance mechanisms, especially the Arctic Council. Into China's scientists also quite deeply involved those projects under the working groups of the EC. And we have also participated in many other multilateral dialogues platforms such as Arctic Circle, Arctic Frontiers, and etc. So I think there's a quite important issue to mention that China, together with Japan, South Korea, and other actors, signed an agreement to prevent unregulated high sea fisheries in Central Arctic Ocean, which already entered into force. And I think it set up a quite important example for multilateral cooperation between Arctic countries and other stakeholders outside Arctic Council. So let me finish with this. I think as an important stakeholder in Arctic affairs, China has become, I would say, a victim of today's dilemma in Arctic governance, caused by unprecedented geopolitical tensions, mainly because the Ukraine crisis, or you can call it Ukraine war. The stagnation of dialogue within the Council weakened China's participation, and the over-enhanced security factors in Arctic cooperation also increase the risk of China's participation. I think in general, the international governance of the Arctic Council in particular, are at decisive crossroads. The question about whether the Arctic Council is dead or it's just a stagnation that can be overcome in the future, I think all those questions are very much matters to all of us. And I think that's why our discussion will have more will become more valuable like today's discussion. I think I will stop here. I'm really looking forward to your comments and questions and further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Xiaolong, for introducing the 3 pillars of Chinese Arctic policy. I think you make a very well known and debatable question at this moment. China is a victim, and his role in the Arctic Council has been weakened because of all the political competition. And given the current situation, we will definitely come back to you after we go around the first round of discussion. Now I would like to invite Ms. Sakiko Hayata to introduce from Japan's perspective on the Arctic policy.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and I'm very glad to be here today. And I also would like to express my deepest gratitude for the dedication of the organizer of this webinar today. Well, in terms of Japan's Arctic policy, I will say that the cornerstone of Japan's Arctic involvement has been its 2015 Arctic Policy of Japan. The policy is a comprehensive statement of Japan's fundamental outlook regarding the High North, with strong emphasis on international cooperation. It outlines specifically the country's three key interests in the Arctic: the research, development, international cooperations, and sustainable use in the Arctic. In its broader third basic plan on ocean policy of Japan, in which the Japanese government established strategy to comprehensively and systematically promote ocean-related to policy, the Arctic policy was positioned as a major policy for the first time. The plan stated that Japan can enjoy significant economic and commercial opportunities from the high North environment, including the utilization and also economic development of the Northern Sea Route. Also, with participation in Russia's Yamal LNG project cited as a specific activities in the Arctic, which is a little difficult situation right now for Japan in regard of the relation with Russia. Also, the plan also stated that science and technology is Japan's greatest strength in leading Arctic policy, an extremely important means of both participating in formation of international rule and promoting international cooperations. It additionally confirms that relevant international law, such as UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, must be observed in the Arctic oceans, and emphasizes the importance of ensuring the rule of law in the Arctic. Well, as noted above, Japan has long made scientific activities a key activities in polar regions. The third basic plan on ocean policy asserts that Japan should make the best use of its strengths, engage in active international cooperations, and enhance collaboration between stakeholders in comprehensive cross-disciplinary research. In this way, Japan's involvement in Arctic region is clearly focusing on scientific cooperations, I'd say. Well, there is a recent development a few months ago, and I say that the development includes the government's preparation of the fourth basic plan on ocean policy, which is expected to be approved by cabinet, hopefully next month on May. The document stated that a situation surrounding the Arctic is uncertain under these situations, as some Arctic-related to activities, including those of Arctic Council, are currently suspended due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, Japan will continue to promote the three pillars of the Arctic policy: research and development, international cooperations, and sustainable use. While maintaining its policy, Japan will continue to exchange information with relevant states and make full preparation for all possible scenarios. And those are like very strongly emphasized, must be strongly emphasized on the next ocean basic plan of Japan by Japanese government. Well, also the plan may be mentioned about specific initiative includes steady construction of Arctic research vessel that will contribute to eliminating observation gaps, and also promoting observation research and human resources development through Arctic research project called ARCS-2 of Japan. Well, in particular, the utilization measures and navigation plan for Arctic research vessel as an international research platform will be studied so that the new vessel can be operated promptly after its completion. In addition, Japan will enhance its presence by communicating these efforts in bilateral discussions and international conferences, even though under these difficult situations. Basically, well, Japan would like to continue the scientific cooperation with relevant states in the Arctic, but we say that, well, Japan was majorly working at made a contribution to the Arctic through the Arctic Council, but under this situation, well, it's a little bit like difficult for Japan, honestly, to contribute to the Arctic. So hopefully, well, this situation like end soon so that we can start the dialogue inside of the Arctic Council. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. HATAYA. I think you also mentioned from the Japan's Arctic policy, you also mentioned the 3 pillars, and I actually, you also emphasized the design for cooperation. And I think that's exactly the background why we put together this panel today, like countries like Japan and China, and probably South Korea. We will hear from Dr. Kim very soon whether our role in international cooperation would be impacted, or to what extent will be impacted by the current situation of the Arctic Council. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to invite Dr. Kim to provide from a Korean perspective.
Thank you very much. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for inviting me to this very important webinar. Due to the time restraint, I will directly go to my presentation. I'd like to share my slides. Is it? Can you?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. So today I will speak about the Arctic policy of the Republic of Korea and its challenges since Russia-Ukraine war. So I will deal with the chronological development of the Arctic policy of the Korea, and I would like to introduce vision and policy goals of the Arctic policy of Korea. And due to the time restraint, I will skip the implementing programs. It's very detailed. And at the last part, I will share some challenges of Korea since Russia and Ukraine war. Firstly, 1993, the South Korea conducted a basic survey and research on the Arctic for the first time. And in 1999, launched joint research on the Arctic Ocean with China for the first time as well. And also, before joining the Arctic Council, Korea established the Dasan Arctic Science Station in Norway in 2002. And also, we applied for the observer status in the Arctic Council in 2008. And also, we built a 6,950-ton icebreaker Araon in 2009. And also, we joined the Svalbard Treaty in 2012. It's a very short chronological development. And in 2013, Korea also joined the Arctic Council as an observer, and we implemented a national domestic measure by drawing up a master plan for the Arctic. This was the beginning of the Korean government's investment on the Arctic scientific research and domestic institutionalization of the implementing Arctic policy. So, but South Korea was also the newcomer in terms of the Arctic research and Arctic activities, but there was just some domestic debates or suspicion over why Korea government, South Korea has invested a huge amount of money with Arctic activities, considering the international status of the Korea and also considering our government capacity at the time. But in 2018, there was just some momentum. Korea signed the agreement to prevent unregulated high sea fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean. So to some extent, the South Korean government's Arctic policy got some momentum to get the justification to invest enough infrastructure and scientific research on that point. So in 2019, we ratified the 2018 agreement as far as we can do. And also 2020, we enhanced our implementing measures on the Arctic research and Arctic activities. So we developed a future strategy for polar research. And 2021, we enacted the Polar Activities Promotion Act, and we developed 2050 strategy for Arctic activities. And in recent years, we decided to invest $205 million in building the second 15,000-ton class ice-breaking research vessels by 2026. So we already had around the first icebreaker around, but it was usually utilized for the Antarctic research. So there was just some pressure on the ships and researchers. So we decided to invest to build a second icebreaker. And also 2023, we developed the first Korean Polar Policy Master Plan. So before that, before 2023, the Korean polar policy was divided between the Antarctic policy and the Arctic policy. But after we enacted the Polar Activities Promotion Act, we emerged the Antarctic and Arctic policy into the Polar Policy Master Plan. But unfortunately, 2022, the Russia and Ukraine war broke out. So, and next, I will briefly introduce the vision and policy goals of the South Korean Arctic policy. So our vision is the sustainable future of the Arctic, and major policy goals consist of building a cooperative Arctic partnership and enhance scientific research activities, and thirdly, explore new business opportunities in the Arctic. I think the general policy goals would seem very similar to those of the China and Japan's Arctic policy and activities. The policy goals is divided by the four major goals. The first one is strengthen international cooperation by actively participating in the Arctic Council and also its bodies. And secondly, we are aiming to encourage scientific and technological research capacity. And then thirdly, we try to pursue sustainable Arctic business. For example, developing the Arctic shipping routes, and also we are investing some using some port in Russia or Norway. So lastly, we also would like to secure institutional foundation from the domestic point of view. So we didn't have the separate national act before 2022. So we tried to enact the national legislation for giving some legitimacy for further develop Arctic and Antarctic policy. So this is the four major goals. And from my own opinion, that the first goal and second goal, like the international cooperation and scientific research, achieved that we got the very successful achievement from the scientific and research perspective. But however, when we consider some kind of shipping routes and some fishery issues and industrial point of view, we are far behind with some Arctic states also and the other observer status. So this is the main vision and policy goal of the Republic of Korea about the Arctic policy and Arctic activities. I'd like to skip the implementing programs. It's very similar to those of the China and Japan. So in 2022 February, after outbreak of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the South Korean government decided strongly condemned Russia's armed invasion against Ukraine. And also we decided to actively join the international community's efforts, including economic sanctions, for a peaceful resolution of the situation. So with that decision, the government has taken the measures. Review of export control on Russia will be strengthened to block the export of a strategic item to Russia. And secondly, we participate in the exclusion of Russian banks from SWIFT and further decide on the details through interagency consultations. Based on these measures, almost every Arctic activities and policy of the South Korean government was stopped. So since 2022, as you may know, so there is no more cooperation or no more activities regarding the Arctic policy and Arctic activities, even though we were very well prepared for the enacting the national legislation and also decide to build the second icebreaker. It was unfortunate to me as well. And this was the situation right after the Russia-Ukraine war. And also last June 2022, the Arctic 7 states without Russian Federation, they made some joint statement. And according to the statement, they decided to announce the pause in their participation in the Arctic Council, as our moderator Nong explained very well. So this kind of a joint statement, the South Korean government has aligned itself with the position of Arctic 7 without involvement of the Russian Federation. And we still has taken the position that without some kind of changes on the war, Ukraine situation, I think it will be very difficult for the South Korean government to take the very active role or active participation in the Arctic Council as an observer status. This is my very brief introduction about the policy and policy goals of the Arctic of the South Korea and some challenges after the Russia-Ukraine war. Thank you very much for kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. That's a very comprehensive introduction on the South Korea's Arctic policy. And my understanding is that South Korea always act very quickly, because in 2013, after all the Asian 5 got observer status, South Korea is the first country to come with the Arctic Ocean, it's called policy master plan, right? In 2013, you're the first country. And now I think South Korea has already listed a list of very concrete measures how to deal with the current situation. Now, thank you again. I would like to turn to Captain BISEN from the Indian perspective, because it's very interesting. India is the last one to issue the Arctic policy paper in March 2022, which coincides very interestingly with the joint development Arctic Council 7 member states. So we would like to hear from the Indian perspective and how India decide to put together this Arctic policy after almost 10 years. And with Captain BISEN, the floor is yours. Do we miss Captain BISEN? Let me see. Oh. Captain BISEN, are you muted? We can't hear you.
I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Nong for inviting me, and the University of Alberta and Institute of China-American Studies for giving me this opportunity. And let me dive straight into my presentation. I have a PowerPoint, and since the time is short, let me share my screen and start my presentation. Yeah. So, my name is Captain Anurag. I'm a serving officer in the Indian Navy, and at the outset, I'd like to state that this presentation represents only my views, and these do not represent the views of the Government of India. What you see on the screen is the Arctic Policy of India, which came out on 17th of March last year, and I had the privilege of being a part of the drafting and approval process of this policy. And I'll quickly run through very brief, highlights of the policy and the chronology of India's Arctic involvement. In 1922, India was one of the original 14 high contracting parties to have signed the treaty. 2007, we sent our first scientific expedition to the Arctic. And 2007, again, the Government of India made the Ministry of Earth Sciences at Government of India responsible and the nodal ministry for all scientific endeavors in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and the National Center for Polar and Oceanographic Research became the nodal agency. It is a establishment under the Ministry of Earth Sciences, and it's based at Goa. And what you see here on the screen is Himadri, which is a station in the north, and Maitri and Bharati in the Antarctic, and Himanch in the Himalayas, which is often referred to as third pole. And what you see in the water is the research vessels, which are often carrying out research at sea. 2008, India's scientific station Svalbard was dedicated to the nation. 2013, we got observer status in the Arctic Council along with the 4 other observers. 2014, we deployed our first multi-sensor polar mooring in dark, and since then, it was, I think, retrieved in 2020. We've had more than 2,800 days of data collection, and it has yielded very rich data in scientific studies. In 2015, India set up its multi-sensor observatory, Gruvapadat, and this is connected real time with the National Center for Polar and Oceanographic Research, and it gives the data. The real time, 2019, our observer status was reaffirmed, and as I mentioned, 2022, our policy came out. Our thrust areas in the Arctic are primarily scientific, long-term monitoring of physical, biological, chemical, and biogeochemical aspects of Arctic fjords, mass balance studies of glaciers, ambient acoustic noise, monitoring degradation of permafrost. I'm just being very brief because there is a time restriction. Over 400 Indian researchers have used our Himadri station till date. So there are about 25 to 30 researchers. They use this station. It's manned for about 180 to 200 days in a year, and the target is to take it to beyond 200 days every year. And there have been about 80 peer-reviewed publications, Indian publications on the Arctic, and the breakdown you can see on the right side of the screen. Now, policy came out, as I mentioned, 17th of March last year. Very briefly, I will just show you the highlights. Mission statement is to enhance India's cooperation with the Arctic region, to harmonize polar research with the third pole, Himalayas. As you are aware that the Himalayas are the largest source of fresh water outside the 2 poles, and similar conditions to the Arctic. Himalayas also are home to India's 2 major rivers, Brahmaputra and the Ganges, which drain about more than 40% of India's area, and about 60% of India's population is sustained by these river basins. Also to contribute to efforts to enhance humankind's understanding of the Arctic and to advance the study of Arctic within India. So the policy is based on 6 pillars. I will not go into the pillars because of constraint of time. It is science and research, and climate change and environmental protection are the 2 main pillars of the policy. India believes in sustainable, development and sustainable exploitation of resources from the Arctic. India is interested in resources from the Arctic. In fact, the hydrocarbons in the Arctic and the rare earth elements can actually address India's energy security as well as deficiency in these minerals. India also looks to undertake capacity building, national capacity building on the Arctic. And there is an implementation mechanism. So it is a policy with actionable timelines, and it has got goals, but those are not in the public domain, although the policy is in the public domain. Recent Indian activities in the Arctic, India primarily participates in the affairs of the Arctic Council. That is under suspension, as you are aware. But India has been carrying out its research through the working groups. As I understand, India's research in the working groups is not affected really too much. India is part of 5 of the 6 working groups of the Council, and India was a member of the 3 task forces. We have also been attending events of the Arctic Circle, and as you can see, 4 to 6 March, the Arctic Circle Japan Forum, which was conducted, India was represented in that. And I would just like to mention that India International Yoga Day was celebrated in Arctic in the big way, and this year it is planned to do it in the Arctic and Antarctic in both the poles. So it was done in indigenous republics in Chukotka and Sakha Republic, in Russia, in Greenland and Faroe Islands, and in the Finnish Lapland. So India basically, I will mention later as well, and we could discuss India's Arctic theme is actually Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which says world is one family, and it resonates very strongly with Arctic's interconnectedness, that whatever happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. I have written, on the occasion of this participation in this webinar, I have written a piece today. It is being published in my institution, India and Asian Observers Need for Coordination in the Arctic Council, and you could read it. If I have time, I just briefly mention role of Asian observers. This is my observation that the research of Asian observers is affected because of this imbroglio in the High North. And it is also partly because of inequitable provisions for observer states in the Arctic Council, where observers are excluded from the decision-making process. Our engagement is limited to the level of working groups. Financial contribution is limited to 50% of the total contribution. And research proposals can only be through an Arctic state or a permanent participant. So India, let's say, if it wants to collaborate with China through the aegis of Arctic Council, or with Japan or South Korea, we cannot do it, amongst the observers. And you, of course, are required to adhere to the Ottawa Declaration before joining the Council and during a tenure in the Council. Although I must mention that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, it permits for marine scientific research, unimpeded marine scientific research beyond the extended continental shelf and exclusive economic zone of a coastal state. Arctic Council, in my estimation, is broken forever. It is expected to remain in limbo for the foreseeable future. And the trust deficit which has happened, it is unlikely to be business as usual, at least for the foreseeable future. And this is also reinforced by Norway. 27th or 28th March, they came out with the priorities for the Council, and they have stated that work in the Arctic Council moving forward will reflect the current political reality. United States also recently said that cooperation with Russia in Arctic is virtually impossible for the foreseeable future. And Russia itself on 21st February amended its Arctic policy, where it has removed, mentions of its collaboration with the Arctic Council, and it is focused more on bilateral cooperation with other countries based on its own national interests. Possible realignments. One plausible scenario is Arctic Council splitting right down the middle, A7 on one side, and they're all NATO countries. They will eventually be NATO, with Iceland eventually joining, and Russia on the other. Russia is likely to gravitate towards China and possibly India in an effort to balance. I say India because yesterday, I went through this administrative circular for Arctic Science Ministerial, which is being held tomorrow and day after at St. Petersburg. And if you read this, it is very interesting. It says the meeting will be held, attended by representatives of Russia, Norway, India, and China, as well as representatives of Arctic Council observer states. So singling out, Russia and China from the other, China and India from other observer states, it's quite interesting in my opinion. And there is also, it is reflected growing ties in the Arctic mirror, Russia and China's, across the spectrum, warming the relationship. President Xi Jinping visited in the end of March, and there were discussions on a joint working body on the Northern Sea route, and Arctic and LNG-2 was discussed. Yamal and LNG-2 was also highlighted. Now, India's relations with Arctic Council countries, very briefly, India has got the highest form of relations with United States as well as Russia. India conducts 2+2, dialogue with both United States and Russia. With United States, with the diaspora and the democracy drives the relationship, and it is said to be one of the most consequential relationships of this century. And with Canada, 4% of Canadians, they are of Indian heritage, and we've got long and bilateral relationship with Canada as well. With Russia also, we have annual summit mechanism. 21 annual summits have happened so far, and almost 31.17% of India's arms are of Russian origin. And Russia is the only country which has used its veto 5 times in favor of India. So Russia is a long-standing partner of India, and it is unlikely that India is going to, favor A7 or the Western Alliance at the cost of Russia. Policy options for India include Arctic actually, and then of course there is China. I forgot to mention. So China presents the third facet of the triangle in the Arctic. Arctic presents. This is my last slide, Dr. Nong. Arctic presents a complex set of opportunities as well as challenges to India. India needs to remain engaged in the Arctic to secure its increasing national interests, and casting its lot with A7 or Russia would not be a beneficial policy option for India. Increasing dependence of Russia on China will also not be beneficial for India. And it is my proposal that India with Asian observers could use this state of flux in the Arctic Council to seek a more inclusive and an equitable council. As I mentioned, that there are inequitable provisions, and India, China, South Korea, Japan, they are 4 big countries, and they are all G20 countries. So we could use this opportunity to get together and press for a more, Asian say in the Arctic Council. And again, my proposal is that China, Japan, and South Korea are already undertaking a trilateral high-level dialogue. I understand it's not been held since COVID, but this could be expanded to include India and Singapore, and have a kind of an institutional mechanism. Of course, you have Asian Forum of Polar Scientists, but that is mainly a scientific body. But the geopolitics and the other aspects, we need to have an institutional mechanism, and it would result in a greater Asian perspective on Arctic and a more balanced council. And for those who oppose, or for those who say that India and China would be, will not be able to work together, I say that they have worked and are still working beautifully together in many multilateral constructs such as the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the G20, WTO, and the Russia, India, China trilateral. And a reformed Arctic Council is also in line with India's pitch for reformed multilateral, where India says that we need a more inclusive and accountable multilateral institutions. Also, India's theme of G20 presidency and Arctic policy is Vasudha Kutumbakam, or one Earth, one family, and one future. And as I said earlier, that it resonates very strongly with interconnectedness of Arctic with the world. So with these, I have finished, and I hope that I have stuck to time, and thank you for giving your patient hearing to my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Captain BISEN. That's very thoughtful and helping us understand India's position on Arctic and the idea of International Yoga Day activity. It is very impressive. We'll get back to you with the bilateral relations and also realignment discussion later. Now, I'd like to give the floor to our last speaker today, Dr. Lane. The reason I put Singapore at the last spot is because compared with the other 4, I think Singapore will be a different position. I think a lot of analysts consider Singapore more as a competitive perspective in terms of its role in the Arctic governance. Now, I'd like to give the floor to you to explain to us and help us understand Singapore's policy on the Arctic. Dr. Lane, the floor is yours.
Yes, can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, thank you very much. I would also like to express my thanks for the organizers for inviting me to this very important event. 2013, Singapore became an observer in the Arctic Council. So 10 years has passed, and I'm very happy to share my views on how Singapore's contribution has been evolving and what Singapore has been up to in this space. So, like what the moderator mentioned, Singapore is kind of an exception when we talk about the Asian observers. We are a small tropical country located close to the equator. We are 7,000 kilometers from the Arctic. We don't have a history of polar research. And we only became engaged in Arctic activities in 2013 when we became Arctic Council observer. So why is Singapore interested in the Arctic region? So there are 3 dimensions to Singapore's interests. The first is with regards to law of the sea issues. As a major maritime hub, Singapore is keen to engage in law of the sea issues. And there are various issues being discussed in the context of the Arctic. So we want to be engaged in these discussions. Second, there is a business interest. We are looking for business opportunities for our companies as the Arctic gradually opens up. So the sectors that has been mentioned would include shipbuilding, offshore rig construction, port management services. So these are areas that has been sounded out where Singapore could benefit from the opening up of the Arctic. Third is with regards to climate change. As a low-lying island state, climate change presents an existential threat to Singapore. We are especially vulnerable to sea level rise. So we are closely monitoring the effects of climate change in the Arctic, such as a rising temperature and melting sheets in ice sheets in the Arctic, and just to see how it would affect our environment in Singapore. So as a newcomer in the Arctic space, we actually have a long history of engagement with the Arctic member states already. So I would say that the Arctic serves as a new dimension for political engagements for countries where we already have very good relations with. So when we talk about the major powers, we think about US and Russia, there's a history of engagement. Both of them are Security Council members, so we want to maintain good relations with them. Second, there's the group, which I would say are the small and medium states, Iceland, Finland, Norway, Denmark. Again, Singapore, being a small state, would like to maintain good relations with these countries. And now, of course, there's Canada. Canada is a major economy, and they have quite a big presence in Singapore. And in a way, the Arctic adds more business engagement opportunities for the two countries. So as an Arctic participant since 2013, Singapore has been attending Arctic Council ministerial activities. And we have also been participating in various Arctic Council working groups, looking at biodiversity, marine shipping, sustainable energy development, oil spill response. So what we see is that with this engagement, there is a new layer of political engagement through the Arctic Council. And it also, I would argue, helps enhance our bilateral relations with all these Arctic Council member states. And in addition to that, I would say that because of all these various activities we have been involved in through the working groups, there is a new layer of international cooperation between Singapore and these Arctic Council member countries and with Arctic Council itself, specifically in the context of knowledge and people-to-people exchange, right? So what is the key contribution of Singapore to date with regards to our involvement in the Arctic? I would say that a key role is to help raise awareness on the Arctic to the wider world. We are helping to internationalize Arctic. There are a lot more activities focused on the Arctic in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, and among the youth. These are things that we can do in our region. And what we try to talk about is to let people understand, people who don't really know the Arctic in this part of the world, to let them understand how the Arctic is connected to the rest of the world, how the Arctic contributes to the global sustainability agenda, whether it's through its export of natural resources or in sharing innovative low carbon solutions. This is the key contribution I can think of. And with regards to the current situation involving Russia, our special envoy, Mr. Sam Tan, was just in Alaska recently, whereby he was talking about this situation. And he noted that the Arctic Council is an important platform for research and activities in the Arctic region. And basically, Singapore will take the cue from the Arctic Council member states on whether to resume Arctic Council activities. Nevertheless, Singapore will continue to support the work, mission, and activities of the Arctic Council, including its work through the working groups wherever possible, so that the global community can benefit from the Arctic Council activities. So I'll end my presentation now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lam, for helping us understand Singapore's policy. And the last part of your talking point about encouragement of Arctic Council activity, that's bring exactly everyone to our next discussion. So before I open the floor to the question from our online participants, I would like to ask a few questions to help us understand more about the future of Arctic Council from the Asian countries' perspective. So the first question, as Captain BISEN mentioned, he has a lot of options for realignment and RT7 or RT1. And there was also there was a debate whether there should be an Arctic Council version number 2. I think the idea, I read the article, the idea is that to want to involve more observers and more countries, more stakeholders to be a part of the decision-making process, and which is slightly different from the structure of Arctic Council, where observer state does not have power for the decision-making. So for the idea of Arctic Council version number 2, I think for Asian states, they will be given more opportunity to voice their concern. Also, they are going to let their proposals in terms of scientific cooperation be heard for a larger international community. So I would like any one of you want to contribute to this topic. Do you think for Asian member states perspective, it's a durable debate? Because I think for Arctic Council member states, they're very tough, like to set the benchmark for Asian countries to get the observers data, because you need to recognize their sovereignty and sovereign claims. There are a lot of preconditions to get observer states. So on the current debate on the Arctic Council version number 2, what's your understanding on that? Is it durable, or it's going to invite a lot of criticisms from Arctic Council member states at this moment? So who want to go first? I'm going to ask Dr. Zhao.
Let me just pick up some points. I think we all have to admit that although the so-called Arctic Council platform is not perfect, of course, but it is indeed a quite symbolic, significant outcome from so-called peaceful period of time in the Arctic after the ending of the Cold War. So I think it also represents the consensus among Arctic states, which would like to involve and engage other non-Arctic states to participate in Arctic affairs. So in that sense, I think the concept of so-called Arctic Council second generation, I will call it, the key question would be how long it will take for such institution to build up a quite similar credibility and efficiency like current Arctic Council. This is the number one question that which represent the I think a quite significant uncertainty. And the other one is how would those Arctic states react on this concept? And I think also currently, of course, the Arctic Council is facing some challenges, even the crisis of legitimacy, because in the June, I believe, there will be handover of chairmanship of the Arctic Council from Russia to Norway. But if Russia will be also isolated as current status, I don't think Russia is willing to participate in any kind of a legal process to handle this chairmanship. So there will be a quite significant crisis and of legitimacy for Arctic Council, because in the Ottawa Declaration or rules of procedure, there empty talks about the procedure of withdrawing from the Arctic Council or exclude someone from the council. So there will be a biggest challenge for them, but I don't think this is there will be consensus for them to accept brand new platform and to engage more observers and to provide more voices and rights for the observer states. But by the way, I would also echo here the Captain BISEN's point that he mentioned in his presentation, that I think Asian countries, we should not just only adapt so-called new reality in the Arctic affairs. We need to make our own efforts to, let's say, alleviate some negative impact. Let's say, for instance, on one hand, we could set up some diversified sub-regional dialogues mechanisms on the basis of China-Japan ROK trilateral dialogue mechanism. Maybe we could establish a so-called Asian Forum for Arctic cooperation and include some Arctic states to be part of it. And on the other hand, we could also engage with Russia on Arctic sustainable development agenda by resuming some bilateral dialogue among specific questions or agenda. So I think in general, I think it's too early to discuss about this concept of AC 2.0. And we should stay, I would say, confident about resuming the current Arctic Council as the main body of multilateral cooperation. That will be my response to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhao. I think that's very thoughtful. The idea of Asian Forum would be a very good start to also engage, not only increase the voice from Asian member states, but also engage with other key Arctic coastal states. Captain BISEN, do you want to respond? Because you have a list of realignment, the many versions of realignment. Is there anything that you want to re-emphasize? You're muted, Captain.
Thank you, Dr. Nong. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Yes. Okay. So I do agree with Dr. Zhao Lang that the Asian observers need to get together. I also agree that we are not looking for an Arctic Council 2.0, and there is a period of uncertainty. We cannot say this way or that way how things are going to turn out. So the key words that I would say are legitimacy, as you mentioned, credibility of the Arctic Council, and uncertainty. These are the three keywords which characterize the situation at present. Also, some of the as Asian observers, I think we could strive for a more reformed or a inclusive Arctic Council. I will give you an example of inequities. Let's say, India is. How does Arctic impact India? Arctic impacts India's monsoons, and 60% of India's population is dependent on agriculture, and 70% of India's precipitation happens during these 4 months of monsoons. Now, if India wants to conduct research in monsoons, it has to have an Arctic Council member state on board. What I'm trying to say is that something which may impact India as an Arctic observer may not impact an Arctic state as a mainstay. So it would be difficult for India to undertake that research. So there is a need for a greater say in the Arctic Council. That is a short point which I wish to make. I agree that there has to be some kind of an institutional mechanism between the Asian observer states, and we could synergize and coordinate our positions. And that is the answer I would like to give. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. I have a question with regard to the change in terms of shipping and also in terms of energy development in the Arctic. I think in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, and there's not a single voyage either from China or from South Korea, from Japan through the Russian Northern Sea route. So would you like to explain what kind of changes after Ukraine crisis have been occurred from your country's perspective? And in addition to shipping, also the investment on the LNG, for instance, Yama projects, are there any changes because of westernization, etc.? How about Ms. Hayata, you want to go first, and then maybe Dr. Kim will come up.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Well, honestly, regarding the shipping in the Arctic, Japanese companies were originally concerned about both cost and safetiness, did not actively participate in the Northern Sea route. But after the Ukraine crisis, I honestly feel that they are becoming even more cautious in the Japanese private company community. On the other hand, in terms of the energy development, after the Ukraine crisis, Western companies that had been participating in Arctic LNG 2 project announced that their intention to withdraw from the project with Russia, but Japan has made it clear that it will not withdraw from the project. Think about our energy consumption is very low in Japan. But on the other hand, since Western companies providing critical equipment has been withdrawn, the Russia side is preparing a project reviewing this plan and also Russian domestic law. And so I say that the future of this project is becoming more difficult to predict, honestly. So we will watching Russia's activity regarding Arctic LNG 2 project for Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Kim?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to respond to the questions. Before coming to the shipping or energy development, I'd like to point out some points of the Arctic 2.0 concept. I'd like to how can I say, I'd like to argue that the Arctic 2.0 concept is not acceptable to not only to the Arctic 8 countries but also the other observer states as well, because when we recall the joint statement by the Arctic 7, they also clearly state that they remain convinced of the enduring value of the Arctic Council for the cooperation and support for the forum, but they just limited. They just implement a limited resumption of their work in the Arctic Council in projects that do not involve the participation of the Russian Federation. So nobody did not discard the Arctic Council. So I think it's too early for discussing about this Arctic 2.0, something like that. So I would like to also suggest that we should be have some respect and deference for the decision by the Arctic 7 countries, because although it is a very provisional measures, they just have a very principled way. They would like to maintain the projects contained in the work plan approved by all 8 Arctic states at the Reykjavik Ministerial, because it was a decision reached by the consensus, including the Russia, although they are maintaining the project that do not involve in the Russian Federation. So I think we can just find out some compromising points, even in the joint statement by the Arctic 7 countries. So for the time being, the armed conflicts between Russia and Ukraine ongoing, then I think the Arctic observer status and an Arctic 7 Arctic observer state should have some respect for the decision by the Arctic 7. This is my point. And coming back to the shipping routes and also energy development in the Arctic region, from the perspective of the Korea, we were at the very initial stage of the investing on the shipping routes and or the energy cooperation in the Russian Yamal project, something like that. But due to various reasons, the Korean National Corporation, Gas Corporation, decided not to join the Yamal project and very serious energy consortium, something like that. So I don't have exact information about the decision, why they did decide not to join that project, but we had been more focusing on the scientific cooperation because we have a Dasan research base at Norway. So we are not that much deeply involved in the energy or shipping routes development and investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Totally, if you want to say something on this question before I go to the online participants' questions.
Well, just sharing my personal view as well. Just want to say that I share the view of Dr. Kim with regards to what he said about Arctic 2.0. It's important to make sure that whatever new arrangements that's being discussed, there is buy-in from all the Arctic countries. And at the end of the day, the situation that we face today is because of Russia's war in Ukraine. And it is isolated for that. And basically it's sidelined from the Arctic Council. So whatever new Arctic initiative you want to build, it would not really be effective so long as Russia is not part of it, right? And for Asian countries, I suppose that if you really want to deepen engagement in the Arctic space, there's no stopping you or us from engaging on a bilateral basis with the individual Arctic countries, right? And second, perhaps a low-hanging fruit would be to see how Asian member states themselves, if there is any, whether there's any area for information sharing, collaboration, and partnerships, so that work is not being duplicated when we look at Arctic. So there are things from the there are things that Asian observers can do, and in a way, the discussion about new initiatives, I would personally feel that this is something for the countries in that region to determine themselves, right? So that's my position, my personal position. And with regards to the question about how the war has affected investments and operations in the Arctic for Singapore, in a way, Singapore doesn't have a very big economic presence or investment presence in the region. Norway is a very important partner, business partner for Singapore. And, you know, we have a lot of projects regarding shipbuilding and rigs. I don't know how much of it is actually very specific to the Arctic space. But I would generally say that the current situation basically adds a new layer of uncertainty whenever any Singapore business want to invest in the region, right? We are not a major investor there, but if there are opportunities, people will definitely pause to see how the war in Ukraine would evolve, how it affects the Arctic space, how it affects the relations between Russia and Europe. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lane, for everyone for the update. Now I'd like to go to the questions submitted from online participants. Let me start with the question from Mr. Carl Brandersburg. The question is, it seems the Ukraine war may stretch on for years, but even in Eastern, the tension between Russia and Arctic nations are likely to remain. So given the seemingly invulnerability of heightened tension on the Arctic Council, question coming, how might the Arctic Council work around these tensions to continue its important work? I think the question is from all the speakers, whoever who observe the current progress of Arctic Council function may want to respond. Let me rephrase this question in a very simple way. It's a yes or no question. Do you think with the Norway taking up the chairmanship in May next month, do you expect any breakthrough of the current situation, or it's going to be still on Arctic 7 working group meeting and scientific cooperation with Russia? Dr. Zhao Long, do you want to?
If I may, I think it's a quite crucial question for the future of Arctic governance, and I do think I do agree that Norway, as the next rotating president, chairman of the AC, I think it shoulders a very significant responsibility, and to to keep this platform going, and to make sure that the Arctic Council survive. I think with the if we look at on the recent statements made by high officials of Norway, and also the Norway senior Arctic official, the Arctic ambassador of Russia, etc., they have expressed some kind of confidence that the low politic dialogues could be in some form resumed in the future, because as the Norway's senior Arctic official said, the most important priority for Norway's chairmanship is to make sure that the Arctic Council remain as the the most important international forum to handling Arctic issues. And the Russian official said, Russia still consider Arctic Council as a significant cooperation forum. So I think we can expect some limited resumption of engagement and dialogue on so-called low political issues during Norway's presidency, during Norway's chairmanship. For example, the climate change agenda, the question about how to mediate the risks posed by those, geopolitical tensions and climate change to the indigenous people, because Russia holds almost the biggest population of indigenous people in the Arctic. So I think those topics and questions could be somehow carried out by the limited multilateral or bilateral dialogue within the Arctic states, and especially I think the second track dialogue, like the communication between think tanks, universities, I think could be resumed in the, I would say, near future after the Norway takes the chairmanship. So that will be my quick response to that question. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Zhao. And there was a question from Carol Han from Harvard Kennedy School. So one of the questions I think is very interesting to note is, to everyone, was wondering if you could comment more specifically on whether the Asian observer state could or should play a role in bridging the cooperation between the Arctic 7 and Russia scientists when the geopolitical situation is getting worse? I think that's a very important question. I think from the Russian scientists, many of there are scientific cooperation projects. The funding has been cut. And as Dr. John mentioned, that a lot of the scientific project has to be involving Russia scientists. So the current situation, like making the cooperation between Asian states and also Russian scientists very difficult. So any new idea how to bring forward the cooperation? Captain BISEN, I see your mic is on. Please.
Yeah. So I've got a few points to make. One is that I feel I'm quite pessimistic that it's going to be business as usual with Norway's presidency. Also, I would like to make this point that big power rivalry cannot hold the whole world hostage, because whatever happens in the Arctic, affects the whole world. And decisions by a select few group of countries cannot hold the whole world as hostage. Having said that, I have proposed that G20. India is presently the president of G20. Could use its platform for a low-hanging fruit, which is to start the resumption of scientific exchange in the Arctic. And I say it because the G20 represents 6 of the 8 Arctic Council members are represented in G20, and 11 of the 13 observers of Arctic Council are represented in G20. So G20 actually is a good platform, and it is also a platform where the dialogue or it has not been seized between Russia and the West. So G20 is one mechanism where it could be used. India could use its presidency, and there is a mechanism of Sherpa track where these emergent issues are discussed, like G20 has discussed in the Bali Declaration, in the Bali Summit. Ukraine-Russia conflict was discussed. Earlier, Syrian war has been discussed. So there is a platform and there is a mechanism, and I'm sure there would be a will, for the countries to actually take this forward and at least start with the scientific exchange in the Arctic, because that affects the whole globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. I think I try to combine a few questions. I think the question is about whether any new development on your country's Arctic policy. He mentioned that Ms. Harata and Dr. Kim mentioned there is new Arctic policy coming out this year. So any changes that you want to share with us? And the related question is also any update on the current Japan, South Korea, and China trilateral Arctic dialogue, because that has been suspended due to COVID-19. Any further information to resume this dialogue or expand to include more other Asian members like India and Singapore?
Thank you very much for your questions. Well, yes, there is a new essence for Japan's next ocean plan. And one new thing is that Japan's ocean plan clearly mentioned that after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the situation is changed. So so it might be difficult to cooperate inside of the function of the Arctic Council. But at the same time, environmental change has not stopped, won't be stopped. The research and development is very important for Japan in the Arctic regions. And also Japan is now constructing the new Arctic research vessel. So we'd like to use that for international collaborations and also international research program together with Arctic states, not only Arctic states, but observer states for the further collaboration in the Arctic. So that is a new essence for that. And also we Sasakawa Peace Foundation actually hold the Arctic Circle Japan Forum last March, and we had a high level sessions, trilateral session, Korea, Japan, Korea, China session, and we invited 3 ambassadors from these states, and they clearly mentioned that we need to cooperate in terms of the Arctic, especially under these difficult situations. But at the same time, to adapt to this difficult situation, we must include also Singapore and India for this dialogue. So I'm not this trilateral dialogue, it's unclear what will to be, but I honestly think that we need a further collaboration in Asian country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Kim.
If I may.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I'd like to answer some questions already skipped. The first question was about the prospect of the Arctic Council under the chairmanship of Norway in the forthcoming May. I believe that when we, based on the joint statement last June, I think there will be some working groups, specific project will be going on without the involvement of the Russian Federation. I think it would be the very practical approaches from the perspective of the chairmanship of Norway, because Arctic 7 already agreed that they could continue the research, the project, specific project, without involvement of the Russia, even if it was agreed by the 8 Arctic states. So I think the Norway will make every effort to the Arctic Council's mechanism based on the working groups will be going on. So this is my prospect, and my colleagues who are working closely with the Arctic Council, he also expected like that. So the second question about the trilateral cooperation among China, Korea, and Japan, I agree with the mentioned by the Ms. Sakiko HATAYA, that the trilateral cooperation secretariat is based in Seoul, but it is very its activities is very nominal, even though the Korea, Japan, and China have been trying to do something more meaningful or significant effort, such as some fishery management in the Northeast Asia, and also marine environment protection project by using the trilateral scheme. But unfortunately, it was failed to some extent due to the various reasons. So I'm afraid that the trilateral scheme would not play a very important role in bridging the gaps in the Arctic Council as well. And the last question about the Korea's new Arctic policy, but from my presentation, I explained that 2023 we developed the first Korean polar policy master plan, but it is not new. It's just emerging the formal policy of Antarctic policy and Arctic policy. So it is the first comprehensive polar master plan of the Republic of Korea. It was possible due to the 2021 enactment of the Polar Activities Promotion Act. So there is nothing new, but they made some detailed and very comprehensive projects dealing with the Arctic and Antarctic activities at the same time. That's my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. I have a question with regard to the bilateral relations. Dr. Lam mentioned earlier that even though many of the international cooperation projects have been suspended, but there's still ongoing efforts with Asian member states, with other Arctic states on the bilateral basis. So currently, I think a lot of the countries are facing, for instance, there was NATO 7 coming with Finland joining NATO, and then Sweden probably on the way. And then you have, do you feel that your country is actually in a very difficult position to sign, for instance, one hand with Russia and the other hand with Nordic countries, and also with the North American part of Arctic, like US and Arctic? Any dilemma at this moment and how to break through this difficult situation? I don't need to a long answer, but anyone who wants to jump on this question, feel free to open your mic. Captain, your mic's on. Oh, so I don't see anyone who wants to respond to this question. I think I can tell from understanding from your previous discussion, it's very hard. So before I hand it back to ZHAO, I want to answer with a yes or question very briefly. Do you think the Arctic Cooperation, International Arctic Cooperation, is doable or feasible without Russia's participation? I will go from Dr. ZHAO. It's a yes or no question.
I think if we look at this question from the perspective of efficiency and sustainability, of course, the answer is no, because Russia is the largest Arctic country, and with the largest territory, the largest population of indigenous people. And I think any policies or agreements or the cooperation without Russia, they won't be sustained for quite a long time. So on another hand, the war won't last forever. So I think the biggest obstacle for current, governance or resumption of engagement with Russia is, of course, about geopolitical tensions and war. When the war ends I would say, in the future, so I think there will be new start for the Arctic cooperation and the Arctic governance. Especially, I think the most urgent agenda for all of us is how can we to restart our cooperation in Arctic science. I think this is quite important, not just for Arctic states, but also for the all Asian members, observers, to to make our own call and to show our consensus to others. I think that will be a response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. ZHAO. And Ms. HATAYA, a quick answer to the question: is it possible without Russian participation?
Well, it's my opinion. It's same as Dr. Lon, and we cannot think about the Arctic without the Russia. And I got the news that Russia is now planning to pass the chairmanship to Norway at the next ministerial meeting on May. But at the same time, I think it is very hard to imagine any other Arctic state participating face-to-face in the ministerial meeting to be held in Russia. So the situation is very difficult under the current situations. And while it may be difficult to restart the track 1 activities, such as Arctic Council's ministerial meeting, it might be a possible gradual resumption of the working group activities at the Arctic Council. So I think that must be a first step, the scientific cooperation in the Arctic through the working groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Dr. Len?
I don't think it would be meaningful to talk about transnational cooperation if you don't include Russia. So that's my short answer. But I also think that we've been talking about the Arctic Council, the Asian observers. We are looking at it from a very state-centric point of view. There may be some avenues to deepen engagement with the indigenous groups, right? So that's one area where perhaps that is a way to engage those participants in Russia. So I'm just putting this out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. And Dr. Kim, any words on that? Although I understand from your previous presentation on your South Korea position.
I would like to say no, but it also depends on the Russia's future expansionist policy, or whether they are going back to the multilateralism. I think it would depend on the Russia's position. If they are continue to threat Finland or Norway in terms of the security way, then it could be very difficult for getting back some normalize the Arctic Council as if before. So I would like to say no, but it could be also say yes. It depends on the Russia's future position.
Thank you. Dr. BISEN has the last word.
Yeah, thank you. My answer is no. Cooperation in the Arctic is not possible because of Russia, because as Dr. Xiaolong said, that Russia is more than 50% more than the other 7 Arctic states put together in almost every other metric, whether you take population, coastline, mineral resources, you name it, the search and rescue responsibility. So it is quite impossible to do cooperation without Russia. Also, the permafrost research, which is being undertaken in the Arctic, most of it is being done in Russia. So the climate change mitigation efforts and all are going to suffer greatly if Russia is not included in the Arctic Council cooperation. Having said that, I disagree with Mr. Xiaolong, or anybody else who actually says that the Council, the cooperation is going to return to Arctic in the way it existed before. I think it is broken forever because there is a trust deficit. And even in Arctic was a region of cooperation, even at the height of Cold War, but I think that has gone. And especially with these 2 countries, Finland joining NATO, the Arctic Council will become Russia versus A7, and Russia is likely to balance, and it will probably gravitate to get China and India into having a greater say in the Arctic. So I don't think that Arctic Council is going to remain the way it was. Also, I feel, again, my personal opinion, that because of this big power rivalry in the Arctic, the environment and the scientific research and the climate change mitigation efforts have actually been pushed to the background, and we have to, collectively endeavor to get these issues to the forefront again to resume cooperation in the Arctic. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I really learned a lot. And without further, I'm going to give the floor back to Jia to close the panel discussion. Jia, thank you.
Well, thank you, Nong. And indeed, we all learned a lot. This is truly a fantastic discussion with so much expertise in the room, the virtual meeting room, and also so many rich perspectives. Thank you, all our speakers, for staying up late into your night and for sharing your insights. And also thank you, Nong, for so skillfully moderate this important discussion. I would also like to thank colleagues at ICAS and also at the China Institute for organizing this webinar together. Maybe a little plug, the China Institute will host a virtual panel discussion on May the 2nd on Canada's new Indo-Pacific strategy and China. So please stay tuned for more information to come. Finally, a big thanks to all our audience members for your participation and for your excellent questions. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay in touch. Thank you.
Stay in touch.
Thank you. Yeah.
Everyone have
Thank
a
you
very
very
good
much.
evening. Thank
Thank you very much.
All the best to all of you.
All the best. Yes.
The same.
Thank you.